The showdown between the United States and the government in Caracas, Venezuela, escalates as the U.S. seizes a tanker full of Venezuelan oil headed for export. What's next in the showdown between Donald Trump and Venezuela's dictator, Nicolas Maduro? Plus, María Corina Machado, the Venezuelan opposition leader, escapes Venezuela in secret to accept her Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo, Norway. Although she didn't make it in time herself, her daughter accepted on her behalf.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome to Potomac Watch. I'm Paul Gigot. This is the daily podcast of Wall Street Journal Opinion. And I am here today with Mary O'Grady, the journal's America's correspondent, who is tracking this evolving story, has followed Venezuela for years as the U.S. increases pressure on Maduro to step down. Let's listen to Donald Trump talk about the seizure of the tanker.
We've just seized a tanker on the coast of Venezuela, large tanker, very large. Largest one ever seized, actually. And other things are happening.
So the president didn't elaborate very much, Mary, as he often does not in these situations. Other sources in the one thing the president said was later that I guess we'll keep the oil. And we have other officials leaking to the press privately that what is going to happen is perhaps there will be future seizures here in the coming weeks. This is really an escalation of the pressure campaign on Maduro, Mary.
Yeah, I think the least important thing is what happens to that oil shipment, whether we keep it or we give it to charity. Or the point is that oil exports are a big part of the income that the Venezuelan dictatorship derives every year. And they're not as much as they used to be, but they're really important to the regime. So the idea that those dollars are going to be cut off, I think is a very good move on the part of the administration. And as you say, I think there's been leaking saying, this might be the first, but it's not going to be the last if they keep doing this because, the money is an important part of why the regime stays in power.
It's an interesting decision by the administration because we had suggested going back several years ago that this would be a possible thing the administration could do going back to Trump 1. But we never had, according to my reporting at the time, we never had the assets in the Caribbean, naval assets that could be able to pull it off. Now Trump has put, something you got to debate over what share of the deployable U.S. Navy is now pretty close to Venezuela, and some people say it's above 20%. So we have the assets who can do that, and they pulled off this operation. From a legal point of view, it does appear that the U.S. has the authority to do this because the ship was sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury in 2022. This is by the Biden administration for smuggling Iranian oil. It was also sailing under a Guyana flag, apparently falsely, because it's not a ship registered in Guyana. Do you have any problem with the legality of this, Mary?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the international ins and outs of this. But, what I find interesting is that you have all these people who, are worried about kinetic strikes on Venezuela. And this is a way to basically weaken the regime without a kinetic strike. And as you say, going after a ship which has a false flag, it's not registered in Guyana. And basically oil that's been long sanctioned. So I think I'm all in favor of it. In fact, I think we should do more of it. Like I said, those dollar flows are important to the regime. And what we want to do is weaken the regime as much as we can so that Maduro eventually decides he's better off living in Turkey or Moscow or Tehran.
It looks, if this continues, as officials are leaking, that this would amount to an effective blockade on Venezuelan oil exports. And if that happens, then how long will it take for this kind of pressure to really start to squeeze the resources of the regime for staying in power? Because they got to pay that military, they got to pay the Cuban intelligence operatives there.
Well, they get a lot of money from drug trafficking, so I'm not sure how quickly they would run out of money, but certainly it'll be like an embargo in the sense that there will be more resources that might have gone to Venezuela that will be cut off. And I think the other thing to bear in mind is that the regime depends on dollars basically that are flowing to its pocketbook. So that's something that the U.S. has known for a long time is key. I mean, that's the whole reason why Venezuelan oil is sanctioned, right? But what is the sanction worth if you don't enforce it? So I think that this is really I think this will really hit the regime if we do it more than once. I mean, just one ship is not enough. It's going to have to be a more active patrolling of those waters.
Now, Maduro is vowing to stay in power. The president has publicly said that he told him his days are numbered in power. And off the record, people are saying to the press that Trump has told him he and his family should get out for his own safety, and that his tenure there is sooner the better if it ends. But he's vowing to stay in power, and he's now saying he will break America's teeth, whatever that means. But it's certainly a sign of defiance. I guess the question is, I mean, what Trump is doing here clearly is he is squeezing slowly the pressure raising the pressure on Maduro, trying to get him to go so that he doesn't have to do any military action to get him to go. So why do you think Maduro is not taking the opportunity to save himself and his family and go into exile? I'm sure that there are countries willing to take him.
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on here, but I think on one shoulder, he has Donald Trump whispering in his ear saying, you got to go, and probably offering him some kind of a package to leave. I mean, I think that's always been, we'll give you safe passage or something like that. But on the other shoulder, he's got the Cubans who are telling him, you must resist. Look at us. We've resisted for 65 years. He has Vladimir Putin telling him, I took Crimea and nobody did anything about it because they didn't have the will or the guts to stand up to me. And Trump will not have the fortitude to go after you the way he needs to knock you out of power. So he's basically playing chicken with the U.S. administration because he's showing by staying in power for the last 3 months that unless Trump does something more active, perhaps kinetic in Venezuela, he can stay there as long as he wants. And there's one other thing which we have to keep in mind, which is that all these generals around him who are beneficiaries of the drug trafficking, the gangster businesses, the oil, they're worried that if he goes, they're going to be caught up in responsibility for all of the crimes against humanity. So they're also pushing him to stay in place and to hold the line because he doesn't think Trump has the guts to do to push them out of power using force.
So this is becoming an inevitable showdown between Maduro's doubts about Trump's willingness to do this, fed by our adversaries, and whether or not Trump is willing to do what it takes to oust Maduro. My own view of this, Mary, is that having invested so much now in this showdown, that is Donald Trump, having sent 20% or so of the U.S. Navy into the region, having broadcast to everybody, even if it's through leaks, that Maduro has to go, or in one way or another, or it's going to be a real cost to Donald Trump and the United States in lost credibility. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I repeat, Crimea. Nobody did anything to Putin. He took Crimea, and he basically saw that as a victory, and he did more. So if the Trump administration backs off, it's not only that Maduro stays in place, it's that all of the activity that his regime has engaged in, sowing revolution throughout the rest of the hemisphere, is empowered. And that's also going to be a negative for U.S. national security interests in the region.
All right. So let's say that the embargo ratchets up, which it looks like it will, and the U.S. starts to seize other oil tankers. But even that isn't enough to topple Maduro. So then is the next step inevitably in strikes inside Venezuela? That is military strikes by the United States, either on drug production facilities, and we know where those are, or even perhaps on some of the Venezuelan military, which these would be real acts of war against Venezuela.
Well, when I think about the options, I think, yes, tomahawks can reach Venezuelan drug labs or certain military sites from the Caribbean. So that's one possibility. But another possibility is covert action inside the country. I do think we have a CIA presence there that's pretty well informed about who's on what team and where the problems are. And, I've written about the counterintelligence of the military, which is used to repress soldiers in the barracks. I think I've told you that there's something like 880 political prisoners in Venezuela, and something like 170 of them are former military. So they're guys who are sitting in the barracks and look sideways at their friend, or maybe they were scrolling on their phone and they were looking at a website that somehow was linked to the opposition. They were dragged off to the clink. So that repression by the counterintelligence in the military has been very effective. And I think to counter that, you probably need some covert action to get at some of those guys who are running that network, and including the Cubans, by the way. I should add, Cuba's role here is very important because they're really bad at running an economy, as we can see by the mess that the Cuban economy is in. But they're very good at spying and running intelligence networks and so forth. So they're crucial to the operation there. And their view is, look what we got the U.S. to back off in the Cuban Missile Crisis. The U.S. made a commitment that they wouldn't disturb the regime. And 65 years later, we're here. So you need to replicate that. And I've talked to Venezuelans who have said, if they back off at this point, Venezuela will be 65 years in dictatorship. I mean, you'll have a sort of a similar situation that you've had in Cuba.
That's if the U.S. backs off at this stage. I mean, if I think it'd be an enormous setback if Trump got in a position where he had to withdraw. You would see the naval assets retreat, and Maduro still in power, enormously demoralizing. I think he's committed here, Trump.
And, also, I think I would just add to that there are countries in the region that have helped us in this effort, right? Trinidad and Tobago, Curacao. And those countries would also be extremely vulnerable if we packed up and went home.
Key question, though, is whether or not Donald Trump has the will to do what it takes. You'd think because of his blunt talk and willingness to use force against Iran, however briefly, that he would. On the other hand, he has said he's the peace president. He has said he knows he's railed against the use of force by presidents in previous governments. So, and he probably realizes that there's an isolationist, well, he knows that there's an isolationist wing of the GOP that doesn't want him focusing on the world, wants him focusing on domestic issues. So those potential political costs are there that are no doubt in his mind as he contemplates whether or not to try to topple the regime with force.
I think that's why the taking of the oil tanker was so clever, because he's basically, as you said, tightening the noose, but in a way that's not kinetic. And I think if he continues with that, they'll feel it.
Meanwhile, on the other angle on the Venezuela story, María Corina Machado, the opposition leader, a very brave opposition leader, was secreted out of Venezuela to go to Oslo to receive her Nobel Peace Prize. She didn't make it in time for the ceremony. Her daughter accepted the prize on her behalf, but she did finally get there, and she has spoken from a hotel balcony. She was in hiding inside Venezuela for more than a year, though she would be able to talk to people like yourself, Mary, from there. And she had said in Oslo that the U.S. helped her escape. Now, this, apart from the drama of the escape and having her able to get to Oslo, this is good news in the sense, from my point of view, because it means this shows that the CIA really is on the job there and could pull this off, which, given some of the CIA's mistakes or lack of intelligence in other parts of the world, you never really can be sure of. So now the challenge, I guess, will be getting her back into Venezuela. She wants to go back. She said in Oslo that she doesn't know when that will be, but I assume there will be plans for her to do that, and the U.S. will help.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm so happy that she made it to Oslo, and her daughter, by the way, delivered her speech at the ceremony because she didn't get there in time. And I recommend to anyone to listen to Maria Corina Machado's words delivered by her daughter. It's a quite moving speech. But I also feel a little bit of skepticism about what's happened here, because the practice of the regime, and the Cubans have been like this for more than 6 decades, is they love getting rid of dissidents. Their strategy has always been to arrest them, to torture them, to imprison them, and then eventually, after a long period of time, expel them. And so once they're in exile, they're happy. It's another problem that's gone from their plate. So getting her, I don't think that they would be that upset about getting her out of the country. I mean, Edmundo Gonzalez, who won the election last year, has been in exile in Spain for many months. Getting her back into the country is another set of challenges. So that's something that I'm sure she wants to do. Like you said, she's very brave, but I think that might be difficult. On the other hand, I think the fact that she got out and she's been able to speak to so many people in this, in something that got a lot of attention, is really important, because international condemnation of this gangster regime in Caracas is so important. One of the reasons Cubans survived for so long is they had apologists all over the world telling us how, they were a little tiny poor island, and, the big old mean United States was picking on them and so forth. And people made excuses for that dictatorship. And I think Maria Corina Machado has completely punctured any kind of justification for Nicolas Maduro. And, you still have countries like Spain and Brazil and Colombia that are somehow defending him, but they're in the absolute minority at this point. She has been such a strong voice for freedom and the rights of the Venezuelan people that really she's just destroyed the regime with her rhetoric.
And we had the election in 2024, and that was crucial in making clear that Maduro is not a legitimate president, that the opposition won in thundering fashion. And so deposing Maduro would not be a coup d'etat. It would not be an act of American imperialism. It would be American assistance to a democratic opposition to actually attain their rightful place running the government in Caracas. So we'll see how this unfolds. But at this stage, I think it's absolutely crucial that Trump manages to depose Maduro. And that would have domestic implications if he didn't. I mentioned before that there's some risks on the mega isolationist right, but there's also a risk in the Venezuelan exile population in the United States and the Cuban American population in the United States and Florida, who who will not think kindly of the president if he essentially creates this showdown and then backs down.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think his popularity in South Florida will be very much harmed if he abandons the cause at this point. And it's important to keep in mind, people complain, a lot of people in this country complain about the large migrant flows, but so many of those Venezuelans want to go home. I mean, this is their birthplace. This is where their families are. One of the points that Maria Corina makes a lot is how the families were broken apart, and you have children going to the US and parents staying behind. And these families want to be reunited and they want to live in their country. So there would be a big advantage to the US in terms of managing, these large migration flows if these people are allowed to go home.
That's absolutely correct. And having a government there that is an ally of the United States instead of one that has joined the access of adversaries around the world against U.S. interests. All right, Mary O'Grady, we're going to leave it at that for today. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for listening. Potomac Watch is here every day with the Wall Street Journal Opinion, and we hope you will join us tomorrow.